Hey everybody, my name is Josh Gilland and I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me is Thomas Harper and soon Steve Chu, and we will jump right into the great legal issues in the Bad Batch episode Battle Scars. Tom, how are you feeling after this episode?
Emotional, but I got to see a Y-Wing, so exhilarated.
As we've talked about before, that was one of my favorite toy ships that I had as a kid.
Yep.
So it's very easy to get nostalgic when seeing those. It's like, okay, you kept the escape craft. So good
Yeah.
stuff.
How are you doing, Josh?
Good. It's, like many folks, blessed to be working really hard and happy about that. I do have something suddenly in my eye, so that makes life exciting on a video podcast of I can't see, but now that's better. So yeah, let's rock and roll and jump into the great issues that we have with this. And before doing so, it's just as a minor sidebar, it's so nice to have all the Star Wars.
Yes. Yeah, and part of me is still in the mindset of The Mandalorian, where it's like, only a handful of episodes for the season, but I have to remind myself we get 15 for this season, so we're about halfway through ish, which is amazing because I need all of this that I can get, and especially if it looks like we may not get season 3 of The Mandalorian in the fall, we may just be getting Book of Boba Fett. I need all the Star Wars content in my veins as possible. So, and I've just been thoroughly enjoying this show. This has just been pure good Star Wars, and I just love having something to look forward to every Friday, which is great.
Yeah, I feel that they're batting 1,000 because every episode's just
Absolutely
solid. There's no filler. It's all good.
Yeah.
And it's like, thank God, there's a very competent story group at the wheel that they understand how to do a small ensemble cast of characters, and that they dip into the well for other Star Wars characters when needed. It's like, okay, this is nice.
Yeah.
This is nice.
You get the sense that they know where this is all going. This is not going to be a show that has an endless run until it just peters out. This has a definite direction. And unlike the structure of the Clone Wars, and maybe to a certain extent Rebels, there aren't these small contained story arcs involved. I mean, you're not getting an offshot 3 episodes where a certain contained storyline happens. There are, much like The Mandalorian, many irons in the fire story-wise, and things are going to no doubt come together, especially on the back. I think we got set up for a few of those to come back into play, if not this week, then very soon. So it's exciting from that sense too, because it's striking out on a different pathway than some of the other, pretty much all of the other Star Wars animated shows have, from a narrative standpoint, which is really fun.
Agreed. And it's nice to see that breadth of storytelling. The difference between Resistance to Rebels to Clone Wars, there aren't mini arcs. It's, here's the story of this group and what they're going through. And that's just, it's nice. I mean, like,
yeah.
They're not going to have like the X-Files problem of like, oh, we didn't know where we were going. We just created the mystery box and we didn't plan for it to go that long. It's like, thanks. This is, it's like, let's introduce a kid so that way we could see her in live action, set in a story 30 years later. Cool. And yeah, it just, will we ever see these characters? I don't know.
Yeah.
That could be interesting, but there's and there's this recurring motif that Sid keeps sending them out to rescue animals,
which I love.
Yeah, it's like, oh god, it's like, go save the puppy, but this time it's a weird looking lizard that can curl up into a ball and roll, and it's like, okay, cool. And what did Omega name her? Was it Rose or Rosie or something like
Something
that.
like that. Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's just it's like, okay, the little kid gives it a name. It's like, naturally. It'd be
No
weird.
harm can come to it now.
It'd be weird if the kid didn't. It's like, yeah, don't get attached.
Yeah.
So again, that goes back to basic contract performance that we've discussed before. So we don't need to retread that analysis. We should talk about the fact that Omega and Wrecker developed a tradition of going out to get treats after each mission and then putting it on Sid's tab.
Well, and that ties into another issue, which when they get back and Sid pays them, they seem to have a very different understanding of the amount that they're going to get paid. And Sid, it seems like she felt that she had made the term of payment clear, but it was a cut of her cut, and they mistook or otherwise her cut as being what they were owed, and so that's a pretty critical term of the contract. You're talking about Sid's performance. That's her end of the bargain, and the amount seemed to be massively different.
And that didn't happen with the first mission, which was a 70-30
right.
split. This was like, it was a finder's fee, and then they got a chunk of her finder's fee. So there's very different math involved. And if, again, Wrecker and the kid are, picking up snacks left and right after each mission, that apparently is getting costly. So that needs to
and they seem to not be aware that she's charging them for all the supplies and whatnot. And so we go back to sort of basic contracting principles, and I don't know that the entire problem that the Bad Batch has here is what anybody that's ever made an oral contract that has been broken has experienced. Because the business of proving what were the terms, what was the agreement, sort of core foundational elements of the contract become very, very hard, because both sides can seem very convincing. If your only proof comes down to testimony, and it's one side of the party saying one thing, and the other side, how do you prove your case at that point? It becomes very, very difficult, and that's why when you talk about contracts that are, in this case, above a certain dollar amount and whatnot, you get something like the statute of frauds that really requires you to reduce the contract to writing. And perhaps Sid is worried about the expense of that sort of thing, getting a contract drafted, or perhaps this, she's sending them out to do illegal things, and so does that void the whole contract out of the gate? But yeah, I mean, they're sort of getting burned, but they're in a really tough position. They're just in the complete weak negotiating position. They have skills and talents that can make these missions happen, but they're not the only folks out there that can take a payment and get a critter back to Sid.
And it highlights the need to state in your contract, you pay for fuel. Like, if we have to do all of our own supplies on this, then our rates just went up exponentially in order to do so. So big issue there of put it in writing.
Yeah. And I think back to once upon a time, I did contingency work, and as my first job off of active duty, contingency fee work. And part of the deal that had to be in writing in the fee policy in those were that the client was going to bear the cost of litigation. So and that includes pre-litigation activities, discovery, and basic things like making copies and whatnot. But that needed to be explicitly laid out that was going to also come out of whatever proceeds, whether it was a settlement or a verdict, whatever amount that they got at the end of the day, that those things weren't freebies that the firm was just going to pay for. And that's very similar across the board, but you can imagine the really sticky trap that both the law firm and the client would find themselves in if at the end of the day the client is expecting $1,000 out of this whole action and gets $700 back, and the response is, well, we had file folders that cost money, we had all these filing fees that cost money, all the copies needed to be made. None of that's free. And you can understand we're not going to bear those costs. Well, a lot of clients would not understand that. And that's why it needs to be explicitly laid out. And I think the clones are learning the hard way that while they may be very, very combat savvy, they are not so savvy in just the ways of the galaxy and in the way business works.
Yeah, because they came from a system that didn't worry about that. So
Yeah,
like they never.
The Republic takes care of all.
Oh darn! Surprise! Surprise! Yeah, like don't put it in writing. And those were just the big issue there. Now we get again, not to get sappy, but Rex is one of the best characters in all of Star Wars.
There's a reason I cosplay as him.
Yeah, and rightly so. I wouldn't be surprised if we one day see him in live action. My hunch is either Kenobi or Andor would make the most sense for that, but that could be wishful thinking. And
I hope so.
God, that would be so bitchin'. But that aside, we do have a bar fight, so that's problematic right out of the gate. Sid doesn't want to be taking in strays, which is kind of understandable for her. That doesn't mean she can discriminate against clones, saying like we don't serve your kind here. We've been down that road with you can't do that. The public accommodation laws are specifically written about bars and tipping houses, so those cases started at a specific place. So
I wonder why.
What happened here? Yeah, again, those laws are kind of funny to read because it's bars and tipping houses, and that's definitely Sid's. But we get going to a starship graveyard, and someone who's admired, the boneyards out in the Mojave Desert, where it's like we just park old airplanes here, and sometimes we refurbish them, sometimes we pluck them for parts, and sometimes we just leave them to rot. We've done all of those things, but there's always this desire of like, I would love to go there and go look at the airplanes. And we get this, but with starships. And on one level, it reminded me of the Force Unleashed video games with a couple of the levels that they had. Not that there were specifically shipyards in that I remember, but it just had a similar vibe to it. Now, this raises trespassing. So this location is controlled by the Scrapper Guild, and naturally there's a guild for everything. And
of course,
naturally. So surplus military property has lots of rules. And on Earth, in the United States, the GSA, the Government Services Agency, is the one in charge of disposing of government property. And normally it's, they'll try selling it and before just outright scrapping it. It's a crime to steal that government property. And I can't help but wonder if the reason this stuff is getting scrapped is because it's just a massive cover up to get rid of everything from the Clone Wars. Because then there's no evidence that can go back. So
hey, there's Steve. I wanted to point out, you brought up the Force Unleashed video game. That planet Bracca is from Jedi Fallen Order, the newest single player game. So you get to see it in action as a ship breaking operation there. But it's sort of like, think of the Scrappers Guild as the sole proprietors that the Empire is relying on to conduct this operation of scrapping the material. So in a way, even though I think real world, you could think of this like the GSA has, one way or the other, I would say they've gotten to the stage where the items, say a Jedi Cruiser in this case, just to pick a vehicle randomly here, but the Jedi Cruiser they're not going to sell it, but they have made a transaction to deal it off to the Scrappers Guild so that they can break it, scrap it, and then presumably profit from the parts, material, whatever it is there in that case. I find it interesting that the Empire didn't even care to pull valuable parts out or sensitive items. So the med bay is still fully intact. The ship is, has the particular ship that they get infiltrated on this episode hasn't been salvaged yet, but that's their property. At this point, they have to be careful because that's the Scrappers Guild. That's their territory. This is their yard, so it's no different than if you went into a privately owned junkyard. I mean, they're trespassing there, and that's their property, whether it's junk or not. You may think it's junk, but that's a profit item for that. They have spent money on that. They have purchased it. Whether they keep it in a crummy condition on a heap of old Jedi cruisers or not, that's their property, and so that's why they have to be so cautious in getting aboard that thing. Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Hey guys,
It's been but
my apologies. Glad to be
No,
here.
no worries. You came in at a good time.
It's still sunny, so it's easy to get mistaken. Hey, what time is it? Oh, darn. Yeah. So have you handled any GSA type cases with surplus property? Because it is a great way to go to jail.
Have I handled any GSA cases? Yes. Have I dealt with GSA
capacities? There's stuff I can talk about, not very much.
So dipping into my Sea Scout knowledge from my volunteer life, Sea Scouts used to get former military vessels from GSA, and those would become program platforms. And it got way more complicated after the Cold War on how to get surplus property. And I helped with the acquisition of a former Coast Guard 95 that the Navy had, and they had it up in Washington State and would swap out crews on the boomers, the ballistic missile submarines. And so it had a gangway that would lower, and guys would go on and off. And like the paperwork for that was momentous. It was wickedly complicated. I was not involved as an attorney, but the council attorney was involved and going through all the crazy steps in order to get this thing. So,
well, the bureaucratic mentality is the one constant in the universe, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's lots of paperwork, and the fact that this thing's in our episode, they're just sitting waiting to get scrapped, makes sense. And we've been doing that, throughout all of the 20th century with former vessels from World War II, and break them down and build it into something else. So
it's interesting. I wanted to bounce this thought off you two. So they get spotted at the end of the episode, and the scrappers report it to the Empire immediately. And if you've played the Fallen Order video game, there's the opening sequence in that video game is on Braca, and the character you're playing, Cal Kestis, who's a former Jedi that's living in exile, like in disguise as a scrapper, gets found out, and again the Empire gets called in to respond. And so I almost wonder whether, we've been operating under the presumption that the scrappers have purchased this property or own it in some form or fashion, but perhaps they're operating just as a contractor for the government, that this is still galactic imperial property, that somehow Braca is under imperial jurisdiction, and the scrappers just happen to be executing that function because it's cheaper for the Empire to just turn it over to them than for them to create some arm of the government responsible for decommissioning vessels. And that takes on a totally different flavor, because then it's still government property at that point. Not that, you're talking completely different crimes, but not only does the danger factor go up for the Bad Batch and for Captain Rex, but I think, and Steve can probably speak to this. You're talking about theft of, or trespassing on government property, potential misuse of government property. In generally, at least in my experience, at least the way the military charges these things, the penalties, that the punishments are usually a little stiffer when you're stealing from the government or when you're trespassing on government property than if we're talking just straight theft of civilian property. And obviously that differs depending on a number of factors, but that could be what's going on here, that the Empire still has an official role in some capacity.
Good catch. And we don't know. And I don't know if they're going to get into that, because I don't know if there's any lawyers in the writer's room, even though we would all be grateful.
Yeah, just call.
Call.
Our DMs are open.
So
we can infer reasonably. We don't know the exact details, but there is some relationship.
Whether it's a wink and a nod,
or something more formalized, like some kind of actual written contract. There's definitely something there. If we're going to use real world analogies, I think if
the government has
a lot of scrap and they don't have the internal capacity to deal with it, typically the government then will employ the use of contractors, and they have to go through an entire GSA bidding process for that, which is its own kind of story. But once they settle upon a contractor, a general, usually the prime or general contractor will then subcontract, and they have to deliver these good or service at that agreed upon price. They will go out and pull.
And if they play their cards right,
they can make a lot of money. The contract can be very profitable for them, and that's how you hear often criticisms of the federal contracting process, and this is one of the criticisms one hears, is that if you know how to navigate the process, one can become very rich at the expense of the government. Is that fair or not? I mean,
throughout history, and
if there is some form, something suspicious where people are trimming some of the fat, pocketing some of the money that they shouldn't be, or if they
should turn over the government,
they just keep it. I mean, we're getting into the realm of fraud now. This is sort of affirmative civil fraud that they could go after them for to recover money, and possibly criminal fraud as well, where we'd be looking at jail time or worse, perhaps. So when I looked at this up,
my thought is that
I'm combining this with the experience on Jedi Fallen Order, which was a spectacular opening, by the way, when you march forward as Cal Kestis and you see the entire starship graveyard. I thought at first, like, okay, this is just a spaceship graveyard like Jakku after a tremendous battle, and this is all abandoned property, right? It turns out that's not quite the case. We do learn on Bracca there is this kind of recovery salvage operation. They're basically going through these ships, try to pull out whatever's useful, whatever can be reused, and then presumably at some point they'll just kind of walk away from it. But during that process, and the scrappers seem to be doing that, okay, they're looking for anything valuable that they can still be used, and they presumably would need to turn that over. I'm sure there's a finder's fee involved, or the scrappers are making some money there. So I think we can infer that that's the most likely form of business understanding between the two parties, the scrappers on the one hand, the Empire on the other. Is it formalized by contract? I don't know. Is it wink and a nod? Who knows? But who at this point would want to incur the wrath of the Empire, right? So
when that's just it. Yeah, it could be as simple as like, hey, we see some very wanted fugitives. We don't want to lose this lucrative relationship that we have. So it's this, the Empire is the authority, so to speak. It's like calling the police.
Yeah.
Hey, this gets me in good with the Empire. They're gonna
just keep sending me business, and they'll lay off my back here. They'll look the other way when I pull a couple of power converters and stash them away in my private storage.
Yeah.
So,
Well, think about too in Solo, a Star Wars story. There's this big breakout at the Pike Syndicate controlled Kessel Spice Mine. Some illegal stuff going on there with slavery and whatnot. But who shows up as the Falcon blasts its way off the planet? Well, it's none other than the Empire with a Star Destroyer in response. So I think this is one in a long series of kind of shadowy gray area relationships that the Empire has, where they've got a vested interest beyond just finding the Bad Batch in having a relationship with an organization like this, and probably an organization that has a monopoly on this type of practice, whether it's, because I think about like the different guilds in Star Wars. You've got the Mining Guild and the Scrappers Guild. These are groups that have banded together to kind of corner the market on a particular type of service or good delivery. And I think, Steve, you're right on the money. They don't want to lose that cash cow.
And I'll just comment too, that one of the more interesting things about Star Wars is, Star Wars does grapple with this dark underbelly, borderline criminal element, sometimes overtly criminal element throughout the galaxy, right? And it's just very interesting. We've seen this time and time again. Empire. We can't be.
I think the Scrappers Guild detected his
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So.
Yeah. Oh, and that'd be weird if it was. I don't think it was Rex tipped them off with taking the call. I think it was being out in a place that could be seen. Like if he had done it from, say, the bridge. Granted, there's no power, so getting up there would be a pain in the neck. But still, it's if they had gone to the hangar deck and if that was open like that, get a signal out that way. But you think he would still scramble it? I would bet that it was just being out in the open, which seems like a real JV mistake for them to make.
Yeah, right.
Who's gonna see us out here?
You guys probably already covered. You guys,
again, my apologies for coming in sort of
a little later, but how cool!
Captain Rex, like I got up and cheered.
My two boys looked at me, Dad, it's Rex, yay! I thought
I did that, but I was like, he's still flying a Y-wing.
Thomas, I will say I saw your post before I saw.
I realized, okay, Rex is going to be in this.
to be fair, that I didn't mean to spoil it for you. I'm sorry, but the
it's fine.
This episode is like hours after the events at the end of season 7 of the Clone Wars. So realistically, he hasn't had much of an opportunity to find a different ride. But I like that he's still stuck with the Y-wing, though.
That was cool.
So I just opened up chat, and we have a couple of great messages from Christina here, who's watching live, and in it,
welcome.
Thank you. In it, she highlights out that there's often an option for surplus goods, yes, and that there also could be an NDA because there could be some valuable IP in the tech, similar to a vendor that destroys data.
Very good point.
That's excellent because there could still be state secrets on that. It's like, heck, like the Norden bomb site's still classified. Like there's stuff that it's like plans for B-17s are still hard to get for a specific reason. And so there could be really useful IP that could help others build starships. So they would want that to not get into anyone else's hands.
Dad, I mean, you could have the Nava computer with all sorts of stuff. You could have, I'm thinking of the holo table, the strategy table that these Star Destroyers are equipped with. I don't know if that has a storage device or whatnot, but there's all sorts of things. And then, Josh, you made the point. There's probably some stuff related to some things that old Palpatine doesn't want others to find out. So,
right.
Why go through the trouble of trying to trust that people won't stumble into this when you can just scrap an entire fleet of capital ships, destroy it, and just sweep the secrets under the rug like that?
Yeah, and it's weird that they're not doing any like it's early, but like any Bikini Atoll type tests. It's like, let's just see what this super weapon mounted to the side of a starship does to them for science.
Nobody's gonna miss Braca.
No, right? Yeah, we got away with it with Jedha, so let's do Braca, right?
Yeah,
which hasn't happened yet, but still,
we will get away with it. Yeah,
mining disaster and scrapping disaster.
Yeah, the NDA point is a good
because farms work on
heavy security clearances to do work when they're working on.
Yeah.
For example, the development of many of the fighter jets that we've had for the United States government by companies such as Lockheed Martin. There's an ongoing contractual relationship between contractors on the one hand and the government on the other. And when there are communications about highly sensitive materials, a lot of those there are a lot of precautions that have to be taken. People may have heard of what's called a SCIF room. Yep. And that's a secure room where you can have high level sensitive conversations. So there's a lot of precautions that are built in to allow for information.
Some high-tech stuff, some Palpatine skeletons in the closet. But there's probably some
intergalactic equivalent to a SCIF room being used here.
Yeah, there's probably one on that somewhere on that Venator. The SCIF room in Star Wars is the room where Jabba the Hutt keeps all of his cargo skiffs.
or
first, talk to the Emperor and you see him this
huge.
Yeah, there you go. That's he's in the SCIF.
So Christina, you deal with data breaches all the time. I'm sorry, that's hard work, and I've done research and articles about the duty to preserve. Okay, a privacy officer in healthcare. Yeah, you're busy. God bless you.
I think we have a future guest, Christina. In the chat.
Yeah.
HIPAA is a very involved subject. Yeah.
That is
that's the understatement of the century.
Oh God, yeah, that's hard work. Bless you for doing that. So definitely would love to chat more. So and also get your Star Wars fandom. Just type in, who is your favorite character? It's always good to know that about someone. Yes. Now we get to see our heroes play Doctor. And this gets, it's very rare that you see live Doctors in Star Wars. The only ones that we've seen are the Kaminoans, who everybody else tends to be a droid. Oh, you have an R2-D2 tattoo? That is bloody awesome. Rock on.
Very cool.
You're in the club. Yeah, right there.
Yeah. Yeah, that is okay. Just as
approved.
Approved. Yeah, I got one of the new R2-D2 rings from Star Wars jewelry that I'm quite fond of, and it's quite handsome. Don't wear it every day, but I do have my R2-D2 Geeky Tiki tonight. So yes, he is one of the best characters. That said, what else do we have? You just tweeted, sent to us. Wow, that is okay. Very cool. Cool picture. Nice. That said, medical treatment. So we don't just let anyone be a doctor. They go to med school, they have boards to pass, they have their continuing education as well. Like we want people to be competent. And our heroes end up playing doctor because there's no doctor there. And how much of it is just like plug and play with the surgical bay that is being done, which is just weird. It's like, is it the bay doing the operation and it's just data inputs so the computer can figure out what to do? Or is one of the, bad batchers actually performing the surgery? I think it's the med bay itself.
Yeah, like an auto-operated facility.
Yeah, because it's just weird because you don't, not until like Mandalorian or Attack of the Clones did we see live doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like the Vader comic had one who did the falsified autopsy on Padme.
Mm-hmm.
But there's as Christina pointed out, there's consent, because Wreckard's not a happy camper about doing this. And technically, I don't think he consented to the surgery because they had to stun him since the chip triggered. I mean, he was being a good soldier and staying cool with Omega, but the chip kicked in. Either of you want to jump in on, did he consent to this, or the fact that it's the machine doing the surgery?
Well, you have sort of an interesting mix here, because you have Tech that's doing some work, and Tech to me almost was playing the role that a medic might, and undoubtedly, even though none of the Bad Batch specifically fill a medic role, like that's not their sole function, they had to have had training in that sort of thing to be able to operate independently and without support. And so, when you look at a medic on the battlefield, like a real world medic, they're trained to do quite a few things. Surgery is probably not one of them. So that's probably a step too far. But Tech is doing things that sort of walk right up to the line. And then ultimately, if the med bay is automated, he's then turning over, the portion that I would consider the actual practice of medicine is then turned over to the machine. And the way I justify it in my mind is they sought out the med bay for a reason. Tech probably could have come up with a device to locate the chip as is. They needed the med bay because there was the auto surgical capability that Rex knew the Republic had on board Venators. And it makes sense that they would have one, because it's going to be hard for the Republic to field that many doctors. The clones aren't trained to practice medicine. Being a medic is one thing. You could be exceptionally trained and be able to do a wide range of things, but that's not a license to practice medicine. That facility was very specialized and was one that the Republic no doubt fielded to get around that manpower problem, and probably have a higher efficiency rate, lower error rate, better results with getting clones back on their feet and in the fight without the need to go back to a dry dock or a medical facility and offload your wounded. And so I think that's, in my mind, where it makes sense. And so from that standpoint, I don't think Tech crossed the line and unlawfully practiced medicine.
Didn't have any other choice, because Tech out, this is not sterile, and Rex is like, do you want to go back to Kamino? It's like, no, this will do fine.
No,
I'm good. I'm sorry, I was a diva. My bad.
Just to jump in a little, I think Thomas is absolutely correct. It's very interesting when many of the questions we have about morality and ethics, particularly when they apply to things like healthcare, really become murky through the use of technology. Because if we ask the question, well, is someone performing a surgical procedure, an invasive surgical procedure on the patient? The answer is yes. But does this person have the specialized knowledge sufficient to comport with the standard of care of a competent physician in the community? Well, the answer would certainly be no. One is a trained medical doctor. No one's a surgeon, which is an additional specialty for a doctor. At best, they may be, as Thomas described, a field medic. The naval equivalent being
Corpsman.
Indeed. Not an MD,
but typically a month or two of training, general medical training. They're not surgeons, but they're trained to provide first aid, be first responders, and then to try to stabilize the patient to get them to the specialist. And here we have technology throwing a wrench into it, because essentially all you have to do is have someone more or less flip a switch. They just have to kind of pull up the program on the computer and say, all right, here's what we need you to do. This complicated, complex, invasive surgical procedure. But am I doing if the person flips a switch, is the person responsible for the surgical procedure, or is it the machine? There's a question there.
You also get into the issue of a radiologist, like someone like performing a procedure that is clearly medical, and they are trained to do it, but they're not an MD, who's doing the actual test. Are we in a category like that with a kind of like a big CT machine that's roomier and that's actually doing the procedures? Christina raised, and bless you for playing along this evening, issues of an exception for Recker's capacities because he was out of his mind, and then had to stun him because he was on a murder spree. And then also with telemedicine, the issue of licensees, the person with the license,
state medical licensing,
being admitted in specific places. Same with like people who use things like Rocket Lawyer. Like if somebody's giving advice on how to write a will in California, they have to be a California attorney in order to do that.
So, I can speak to the consent issue, because that comes up often in medical malpractice actions, where people claim that they did not consent.
the procedure goes south,
and there is some complication, and the outcome is
it's not what anyone desires.
The patient can then turn around and sue, and one theory that is frequently floated is, well, I didn't consent to this. And what they're typically meaning is, well, I wasn't signing up for this result, and no one would argue with that. But the relevant question is, were you signing up for the actual procedure? And, regardless of the result, because we cannot guarantee the result, there could be any number of things that happen. Consent itself typically is going to be in writing. Certainly for a surgical procedure, the surgeon will sit down with the patient, ideally and typically, and go through all that could go wrong and say, for example, there's a 1% chance of this type of complication, which is significant, even though it's 1 out of 100. And to
you, it's 100%. But they want patients to be aware of all of the risks.
It is often that we see arguments where someone says, well, I didn't consent to this. It's not as easy an argument as you may think. Recker could say, well, let's look at it this way. Recker signs no paperwork, but he lays down and says, all right, turn it on. And I have to go back to see if he explicitly said that. I think he said something like, let's get this over with.
Yeah.
From that, I think the clones can make a pretty strong case. Look, he did agree to the procedure. Then he could argue, well, I later revoked that consent when I, said, no, I don't want to do this anymore. We're into a bit of a contract law issue at that point. However, one interesting point is that he ultimately goes through the procedure and he gets it and it's successful. But let's say it wasn't, or there was some suboptimal outcome. Recker could turn around and say, well, if I'd known this was going to happen, I wouldn't have consented.
Specifically
rejected that argument. That.
Because if that argument to proceed,
everyone would argue that, and doctors would be held to this very difficult standard.
The hindsight 2020 standard.
Exactly. The standard
is
not medical hindsight. There are cases that
specifically reject that. The relevant standard is
based on what you knew at the time, consented to this procedure. Would a, not you, but would a reasonable person
have consented to the procedure? So even if Recker were to turn around and say, well, okay, so
in my head that could turn me into a killing machine to kill all the people that I loved,
and this machine was a way to get it out, well, no, I wouldn't have consented to that. I mean, no, Recker's not going to get away with that. The court's most likely going to reject that and say, most reasonable people would want to save their loved ones and would undergo that procedure. So the consent argument is going to have some real problems there.
I've
seen that.
John.
Spoken like a man who's dealt with those cases. Something that just dawned on me from the end of the episode with Rex talking with Hunter. I don't think Hunter had the surgery yet by the end of the episode. And
yeah, good question.
His headband's still on. So this could be
maybe it's blocking the bandage.
Yeah, possibly, but there'd still be like a shaved patch. Does this mean if they still got to get his chip out, that means like this is the first time we're going from one episode directly into another, and their time could be of the essence that if they get hit while they're performing surgery, that could go downhill fast. So we might not be done with the adventure on the starship. So let's see if they go there or not.
Yeah, to pull another sci-fi reference here, tell me if I'm crazy, but did you guys get Omega Gleam from Wrecker?
A little bit of James Ridley Scott, and you've got this. She's running into creatures and whatever dangers around every corner. There's shadows.
She's you're cheering for the small girl running from.
She's like horrible... Newt.
Yes, Newt. Oh, Newt Jordan, Rebecca Jordan.
Christine's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, scary stuff.
Yeah, definitely, because the motif works. So but she's not turning on Wrecker, who's probably the one that she identifies with the most. I mean, so Hunter is very much the father figure, and Wrecker's the fun uncle. And she's quite defensive about the fun uncle. And, to the, point of, I'm not leaving him. It's like, okay, like as someone who's been by the hospital bed and in the hospital bed, that's always appreciated. So, yeah, it was good stuff there. But definitely I agree with the Newt comparison. Down to the big rifle that was very much like a Aliens, very Ripley-esque. And her noodly arms have done well with a large firearm right now. So, yeah.
I've got to duck out in about 10 minutes, but I want to dive into this defense of Wrecker, because we're talking about like one of the most chilling sequences in anything Star Wars recently. Just my hair was on end watching this.
Yeah, because he's going after the kid, and it's one thing to we've seen clones under Order 66 now way too many times, and but they at least kept it somewhat fresh. With it's a confined space, everyone's figuring out we don't want to kill our buddy. So there's that level of complexity of this guy can throw starships around. Like, let's not forget the landing clamp that he broke open with his bare hand. So this is a strong dude. So the trick is, I don't want to die or get maimed, and I don't want to kill my buddy. How do we pull off this rabbit trick? And naturally, it's Rex who saves the day, because
of course Of course. Who else would it be?
It'd be weird if it wasn't. So that's but Tom, since it is a work night for all of us, what are your thoughts? I mean, like, we've been down this road before with Order 66 of, and whether it's a irresistible impulse or a mental defect that keeps them from knowing right from wrong. I say it's more than just a mental defect because it's making them take action.
Yeah, I think this is squarely. I made the same argument for Rex when we saw him struggle through Order 66. I think this is a high-end irresistible impulse type case, because you see him fighting it. He's been fighting it arguably since the moment his head got bashed. It's just been more of a slow burn up to this point. Whereas Rex was just, you could tell in the moment he was aware of that what he was doing was wrong, but he could not stop himself. But it's at its core, that chip is a behavioral override, forcing them to do something that they ordinarily would not do. Buck orders from the one foot, in the Jedi, and betray the Jedi, and sort of this ultimate betrayal, and ultimate sort of counter to everything that they're programmed for. And in that regard, I think Wrecker has a really strong defense here, because he literally has there's a compulsion happening before your very eyes. And you see him, unlike Rex and some of the other clones, spelling it out. He's spelling out logically what the chip, I guess, is telling him as to why he has to kill Omega. Anyone can, and she's different because she's not a Jedi, she's not a clone, but she's a co-conspirator. And so co-conspirators, he works through this logic puzzle and says, you also have to die. And it's probably one of the most chilling examples of the depths to which the clones are just overridden by this programming feature, because here it's not some Jedi, it's not a fellow clone that's disobeying orders. This isn't a Jesse versus Rex showdown like we saw on the Star Destroyer at the end of season 7. This is a child. He recognizes that it's a child, and he doesn't care. You're in his eyes. Well, because I don't know if the other one works, but this is somebody that has violated a core order, and they've got to be killed. And so from that standpoint, this is a textbook case of an irresistible impulse.
Agreed. And it's because it's different after a kid who he gets snacks with. Like, we
had popcorn together.
Yeah, it's tasty treats after each mission. So
Christina's absolutely right. The example that jumps to mind, and thank goodness we'll probably never see it play out, but would be Cut Lawkane and his family. Like, Cut is one character, he's a clone, a former clone and a deserter, but would Sue and his 2 kids, his wife and 2 kids, would they be spared? I don't know. Wrecker seemed like it's a pretty broad brush interpretation there. If you had any tangential relation to an Order 66 violation, that made you guilty.
Yeah, but Rex visited Cut and told him about the chip. So what's that mean? Because Rex was really insistent on the Bad Batch getting their chips out. Mm-hmm. And Cut was super mellow about it. So, and it had only been a day since Rex visited.
Right.
What's that mean? Did Cut lose it like years earlier? Like, what's that mean? Because there wasn't a sense of urgency with Cut. And it also raises the issue that even if Cut didn't get his chip taken out, it was either defective, which is why he deserted in the first place, because very few clones were immune. True. Or it wasn't triggered because he didn't get like the Order. Now, granted, it's like we don't know if they have the equivalent of Wi-Fi, and that's like, do they actually have to hear Palpatine say it, or is it a deeper issue of like it's actually activated like the way a SIM card is activated? And Christina again has, that might be why
That's a good insight.
So easily. And Rex knows that. But Thomas, in the last moments before you got to boogie out for this evening, and I have more work to do because that's what we do as lawyers. Who tipped Rex about the Bad Batch?
That's a good question. My heart wants to say Ahsoka, but she's at least canonically doing other things right now. She's off, and presumably where they left each other at the end of season 7, mere hours before this episode, was they were both going to ground. So there were tactically it would make no sense, and story-wise it wouldn't make much sense if they're already back in contact about this. But yeah, I don't know. I have to think that Rex has some experience with the Bad Batch. He would have been aware of them. They would have had a very big rep, and certainly he's monitoring, I think, Imperial traffic, so he probably knows that they're wanted. So good friends to have in your back pocket, I would say.
My thought is, and Christina raises this about the Martez sisters.
That's true. Yeah, that's
so. But they told somebody. I think that somebody was the one who told Rex. That's the way I'm reading the facts. I don't think the Martez sisters told Rex directly. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, and it still begs the question how the two of them got into. I mean, there's a connection there from Clone Wars with Ahsoka, but at that point, Ahsoka in the season, Ahsoka wasn't in touch with Rex.
I'm still going to put my money on Bail, that the sisters have connected with Bail's nascent rebellion, and that's why they were out trying to get the battle droid info, and they told Bail. Bail then told Rex, because he's in touch with Rex. That's my hunch.
Yeah.
Been wrong. Speculations to the path to the dark side. But that's my wish.
Yeah. Well, I've got to duck out of here, but this has been outstanding. Steve, Josh, as always. Yeah. And Christina, thanks for all your outstanding insights. I would look forward to sharing a screen with you sometime soon.
Definitely. Definitely. And she follows you. So fantastic.
Oh, there you go.
All right. I'll see you. May the force be with everybody.
And
good night, Thomas.
Yeah. Night.
Oh, Steve, it's you and I just to close out the show, because again, we're working lawyers. So
yeah.
Did your boys enjoy the episode?
They loved it. They loved seeing Rex come back, and then my older son was ecstatic at the scenery, because he's played Jedi Fallen game. So it was a lot of fun.
Nice.
And yeah, I was bracing them for the possibility that Wrecker wasn't going to make it. I didn't think the writers would have Wrecker actually, kill Omega, but I wasn't sure that Wrecker was going to be savable. At least for now, he appears to have been saved. He may still not make it through the season. Who knows?
Well, Aliens 3 did kill Newt, so anything.
Aliens 3 never happened.
Yeah. Still.
Yes. Yeah.
It was a fever dream. Why do that?
Yeah. Talk about Aliens for a moment is the comic sequel done in the 80s, which follows the further adventures of Hicks and Newt and Ripley. It's outstanding.
And the black and white one, and yep.
Yes. So, very good. Yeah.
Remember it fondly. That said, I Disney only knocks out moms. They're not going to take out the kid. So
the Bambi effect and the Dumbo effect, right?
Yeah, worry about parents, but they generally are going to let the kid live. And I don't think Filoni would do that. So, but this was a great episode. Each one of these has been really rewarding to watch, and makes me happy and grateful.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what we're going to get, when we'll get Andor, and close to it. I just feel bad for the actor how to work with the death. Yeah, that does suck. So like that's that does suck. And I tweeted about this, but with Morrison, in Book of Boba Fett, that's one lucky man because he is the Clone Army. So the idea of him playing Rex in say Andor, I think would be great. I'm sure he could be awesome. I'm sure he could grow a beard, and he'd be about the right age to pull it off.
Yeah.
And fanboys and girls would just lose their minds. But I do agree with D. Bradley Baker. One seems like a nice guy. The one time I attended Salt Lake Comic Con, now FanX, he was on a panel and did the voice, his voice of Fives, and it just seemed like a nice guy. But again, he's acting against himself. The complexity of that.
Yeah.
It's like, and when they have a guest star character, he's the guest star. So, God bless him. This is, we're now going to be double dipping each week with both Loki and Bad Batch. And we're also getting Godzilla Singular Point next week. So stay tuned, because that's going to be a lot for us to analyze and have fun with. And Christina, thank you so much for participating. And hit us up. Our DMs are open, and definitely would love to chat more, because having someone who can write about healthcare issues and the law is great. I'm a new Discovery guy, so and so a litigator. So there's yes, we do now. So if you want to tackle consent as a guest author, by all means, let's break down Wrecker. And bless you. And let me just put my email in the chat, which I know is great radio for those who are listening to this as a recording. And this has been a ton of fun. I will now watch for your email as well. And thank you for sharing that. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. This is always one of the highlights of my week, since everybody works on day and age. And it's nice to be able to talk Star Wars. And I'm counting down the days for things like San Diego Comic-Con Special Edition. Yay. and Star Wars Celebration, where we can actually get together with folks again.
Again.
Yay! So everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Thank you all. And fantastic. Stop broadcast.